Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag-and-drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running.
It's hard to believe that we've been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
So many great conversations over the years about so many great movies. All that said, producing this show week after week requires a ton of work behind the scenes.
Becoming a Next Reel member gives you access to all sorts of additional and exclusive content. Plus, you're helping us keep the lights on. Just head to thenextreel.com/membership, where you can learn more about becoming a member, which costs a measly $5 a month, practically the same as one fancy coffee drink. And you get so much more.
Every month, we record a bonus episode exclusively for members. Those episodes cover movies from whatever series we're covering at the moment, or add to previous series.
Some movies we've covered that only members get to hear us discuss include The Blues Brothers,
The Russia House,
Naked Lunch,
Independence Day,
The Hot Rock,
and Relic, the better one. Plus, members get to vote on what we're going to discuss for those episodes.
We also record additional pre- and post-show content in regular episodes that only members get to hear.
Like conversations about similarly themed movies.
And answering listener questions from our live member chat.
Speaking of our live member chat, we record almost all of our episodes in Discord, where members can chat right along with us live.
Members get access to other members-only channels in our Discord community as well. On top of all that, members get all episodes a full week earlier than everyone else in a private Next Reel feed just for them that includes all the shows in the Next Reel family. The Next Reel, the Film Board,
movies we like, Sitting in the Dark, and more new projects on the way.
To top it all off, members don't have to listen to ads. We've already eliminated those annoying, dynamically inserted ads that, let's face it, we all hated.
We are listening to you.
We love podcasting for a living, and those ads help to pay the bills. Now, we're counting on you, dear listener.
We promise. We aren't going back to those terrible, dynamically inserted ads that don't relate to us at all. All we ask is that you consider supporting the Next Reel family of podcasts with a membership.
Again, it's $5 per month or $55 per year. Just head to thenextreel.com/membership.
thenextreel.com/membership. Get your access to early, ad-free episodes with bonus content, member bonus episodes, and access to member channels and live streams in Discord by signing up today. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to the Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
The Frogmen is over. Looks like you've got what amounts to a legal mutiny on your hands.
From top secret records filmed with the cooperation of the Department of Defense comes the thrilling story of these fin-footed, goggle-eyed, beach-blasting heroes. They fight like men from another world, but they've got Brooklyn, Texas, and Missouri written all over their hearts.
You're a brave man, all of you are. You wouldn't be in this outfit. Nobody questions that. But your kind of bravery comes 10 cents a dozen and isn't worth a hoot more when the chips are down. And the chips were down on that deal.
What's up? We've been hit by a torpedo. Port side aft, sir.
Take it easy, kid. We'll get you out of here.
Know anything about torpedoes, sir?
A little. Had a few days of this stuff during training. They called it the Kingdom Come type. Looks to me like you've got a rough decision to make.
Oh, the big question is, do we take the chance the firing pin will stay put under the ship's vibration, or do we try and remove it, huh?
But I think we ought to take a chance on removing the exploder mechanism. The odds are too big against assuming that fish isn't armed.
Okay, I'm scared too.
Collision! Port side aft!
You have never seen anything like this adventure. Midnight submarine rendezvous with Frogmen. The pickup line under fire. Underwater demolition. Below enemy territory. Fight to the finish where men never fought before.
A legal mutiny, Andy. Have you ever thought about that? That there's a legal and an illegal mutiny?
I actually really liked that line because it did remind me that, I suppose there is this sense of basically, following the rules. We all would like to be assigned to a different unit. And,
right.
I think that was a pretty interesting element here,
Yeah. Apparently, legal mutiny is not an actual legal term. I looked that up because mutiny, by its very definition, is illegal, right? It is an unlawful act. However, in some circumstances, say the Boffins, legal mutiny could be used colloquially or metaphorically to describe situations where subordinates legally challenge or resist their superiors. And that's what they're demonstrating in this film, like a resistance to the point where it's an administrative resistance. At no point did any of the soldiers not perform their duties. That's what would have made it I think, more troublesome in the movie. They all jumped on board to actually do the fighting. So it was still a patriotic act. They just didn't like their CO.
Right, and they were just resigning. And that's why I felt like it was just a fun, clever line.
Me too. But it really jumped out at me. Like, that's... Yeah. I had to look it up. Does he know what he's talking about? I think he does. That's the verdict. I think he knows more than me.
That was good old Gary Merrill delivering that line, who is, of course, the lieutenant commander of the Navy ship upon which the unit of UDT soldiers are traveling with.
Underwater Demolition Team? Is that what that means?
Yep, that's what that means.
All right. So why are we talking about this movie?
We are still in our 1952 Academy Award nominees for Best Cinematography, Black and White. This is the second of our 5 films we'll be discussing for this series. Cinematography by Norbert Brodin, and an interesting one in this lineup because specifically the use of underwater photography, which was not as prevalent at the time.
Do you want to talk about the technology required to do the underwater photography first? That is the thing that stands out to me too. Like, this is the movie is fine. It is an easy watch. It happened quickly, but the interesting part, I think, was covering these guys doing it underwater.
That is definitely why it ended up getting nominated for cinematography. It's an interesting thing because the cinematography, or I should say that the idea of filming underwater wasn't new. There had been projects that had been filmed underwater before, but never really at the scope of this. It has always been like, I think there was a short film in 1914 that was like the first time somebody did something like that. But it's a tricky thing to try getting a camera in some sort of thing that is waterproof so that it can film and still pick up a good image.
In 1950. It's hard now.
Yeah, right, exactly. It was hard through this whole process. And obviously, I think when I think about movies that were filmed underwater, I always end up first going to something like Thunderball, probably because it was much more popular and something that in my head was like, oh, that's probably one of the first times. And I think when you watch that film, especially through today's eyes, and you see the big underwater action sequence, it's really slow paced. But at the time, it was probably just exciting to see people actually doing all of this fighting underwater and the way that they were really expanding what could be done. But that was like, oh, when was that? Like 66 or something? So like, 15 years after this. And this was really put together because these Navy people were out there doing this all through World War II. And so they wanted to find a way to kind of like capture this. And so it really took some playing around with the technology. And I mentioned Cousteau, but again, he was also like 10 years after this. So it's interesting to think about what they were really trying to do to capture these soldiers underwater doing on these. We have 3 missions? Is that how many missions we go on?
I believe so, because the opening mission is the one where they're not in scuba suits. They're just like free swimming.
Yeah, with not even snorkels, right?
No snorkels, just holding their breath, and flippers and masks. And it looks like that one they're scouting the underwater boat.
Right.
Boat traps, is that what they are? Tank traps and boat traps to prevent, breaching the beach.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The next one is the one where they go out and actually one of our main characters gets shot during a prank. The prank heard around the world, and it's still good joke. He lived, good joke. And then the third one is the big one where they have to go, destroy the submarine base. So I think those are the big 3. And that third one is the only one where we have actual other team frogmen who are also underwater, and that's when they go into a knife on knife fight.
Well, and that's also interestingly enough, the one action sequence underwater in this film where they were kind of stepping beyond how the frogmen were actually working in World War II. Because in that particular fight, they're sneaking into this Japanese submarine pen and planting bombs to blow the whole place up. But they were using scuba gear, and the scuba gear really wasn't integrated into their work until after World War II. So in the scope of what they were doing, I think that the writers decided to do something a little more fantastical and thrilling for the film, knowing that after World War II, this is exactly how the frogmen would be behaving in the scope of, like what we talked about in our member pre-show chat, working with the military on films. It may not have been real for World War II, but for people who were watching this movie and getting excited about the possibility of joining and doing something cool like this, you're seeing like the cutting edge stuff that they were doing at the time the film was released.
Yeah, right. And who are the frogmen now? SEALs? Is that what we're talking about?
Right. The Underwater Demolition Team, they were frogmen. They were predecessors to the SEALs. I didn't look to see what the date was of that shift. I guess I can scan it real quick and see if I can figure out when they actually became the Navy SEALs. But yeah, they were really the forerunner for it. Amphibious warfare, that was kind of the whole point of it,
Yeah, right. There are some other pieces of I'm gonna keep talking about the underwater stuff and the actual frogmen stuff, because the story stuff we'll cover that. But one of the things that stands out the most to me, and I'm glad they spent so much time, every single mission, they really give us a healthy dose of how these guys get into the water and how they get picked up again. And it was mind-blowing. Like, who in that chain would you like to be? Would you like to be one of the guys in the water getting yanked out of it? Or do you want to be the yanker, the guy who's freehanding a rope and just waiting for this 180-pound guy to grab it at 20 knots? I don't know what a knot is, but fast. These fast boats picking up guys out of the water. I was blown away every time. I could have watched an hour and 30 minutes of just that, like different scenarios of getting in and out of the water.
Well, that was one sequence where, as we were watching, the way that they would roll off the side of the boat into the lifeboat that will, for lack of proper term, whatever it was that they were sitting in the side, and they would roll off onto the lifeboat, and then once they were signaled, they would roll off that. And I was like, well, it's no wonder they were called frogmen, because their positioning always makes them look like the little frog getting ready to leap, and so they always had this kind of position. And I thought that was such a fascinating reality of how these teams were doing that. And and to your point, like the whole idea of getting back onto the boat and this system, I mean, it made so much more sense when I was watching it. I'm like, oh, of course, you don't have all the guys clumped together, because that's more dangerous for them as a potential target, and you devise this system so you don't have to stop the boat every time to pick them up. It's just like this speed, drop off and pick up, that it was so effective. And I'm like, it was a genius way to do that. It was, to your point, it was a thrill to just kind of watch the process of that each time.
I know, it was exhilarating. And especially the wounded guys. Like, I know that you got shot. I know they winged you, but you're still going to need to grab onto this rope coming by your head at 25 miles an hour. I thought that was so good.
Well, they did stop for the guy who was shot.
Yeah, I guess that's right. A bunch of guys.
The one guy jumped out and helped him get up and stuff.
Right.
But nobody helped the captain who had the sliced leg. Of course, he didn't tell anybody his leg was sliced open. And the commander, I mean.
That's right. Because he was a real man, and he was a real man because there are no women in this movie to even compare him to. They were all written out.
Yeah, right.
There are no women in this movie. So on that point, it doesn't age that well. But what I love is the term they use is that they felt like the filming environment would be too riotous for women. Too riotous. No girls allowed in this filmmaking treehouse.
Yeah.
I don't think it looked great. The movie. The black and white, it didn't look great. And it might have been transfer, age, whatever, but I didn't feel like there was a lot of detail in the blacks. The blacks just got lost. There wasn't a lot of contrast in a lot of shots. I felt like this is one of those black and white movies that hasn't aged well in the can. Did you get that same feeling?
I didn't really think that. It's definitely an older film that I just don't think it had as strong a transfer. And so, like, I don't even see that it's been released on Blu-ray, so it likely has never had like any sort of restoration. It certainly is a film that is still popular because of the military angle of the film, but I don't think that from everything that I can tell, it's never actually had a restoration. So we're still watching fairly old transfers that just end up having a muddier look.
Just feels like it. Right. It feels like it. And I don't know that it's a movie that necessarily deserves to have that kind of attention paid to it. I mean, so we've talked a lot about the technical stuff. What did you think of the film?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was it was a fun film. I didn't love it. It's not like an overly creative story. Generally, the story, Richard Widmark is a new commander assigned to this UDT team. They lost their previous commander, and so, as often happens, they hold a resentment, kind of a grudge with the new person, just for the simple fact that you're not the old person and you don't act the way the old person did. He was the best and your rules are different than their rules, that whole thing. And so it's really this situation where he's trying to get them to do things and handles things in ways that they're not used to. There's a lot of drama between various crew members, but, consistently he is proving himself. This is, again, the commander proving himself to be worthy of their respect, even if they don't like him. And by the end, they do respect him.
Well, we saw that coming around the corner, maybe around the block.
It was a pretty standard by the book script, but, I did feel they developed it well enough where it was very entertaining. It never lagged. Fun characters. I enjoyed the actors in the role. Richard Widmark was great as this lieutenant commander who was struggling, trying to run things the way he always runs things, which is a little gruffer and harsher than how their previous commander had. You've got Gary Merrill, who's the lieutenant commander of the boat that they're on, and the way that he kind of reacts to everything that Widmark is doing is just, okay, it's your decision, whatever you want to do. I had such fun watching him. And then Dana Andrews, who we just talked about in our last series in The Best Years of Our Lives, he's the chief of the UDT team, and I think he works well as kind of this person who is dancing the line between being a very competent frogman, like he does his job and he does it well, but also, as as his commander points out, you're also behaving kind of like a child, and you're doing these things like, he and Pappy, this other UDT crewman that he's with, they want to go plant this flag on the beach, and Chief Flanagan kind of acknowledges, maybe we should drop it, but then does it anyway. And then, of course, Pappy gets shot in the back and injured. And there's this element that, Widmark says, like, you have the abilities, but you're acting immaturely, and you need to kind of get rid of that. And it's, I liked the conflict between these characters. Like they wrote some good characters for conflict, and it was believable. I enjoyed the way that these actors portrayed it, and I bought into all of the drama that was going on.
I had a greater affinity with our new commanding officer, right? Like that mentality of a little bit more by the book for a team that has to be so precise. I felt like it was interesting that the movie seemed to be asking for greater sensitivity in this man's military, when it felt like what was really needed was what we got in our commanding officer. We didn't need him to soften up. We needed his crew not to play jokes in an operation. And I know that's like, I'm obviously applying my sort of transparency on top of this, but it just felt strange to me. As much as I agree with you that as presented, I believed the character interactions and I enjoyed all their performances. I just thought it was an interesting ideology of the movie, that it was like, we're going to show as a real mark against him that he made what I saw as the right choice in not going back and picking up the guy in the boat, that there was already a rescue boat going. He was there to save the rest of his crew on his boat. Don't go back and get that guy, because that guy's going to be gotten already. And everybody held such a grudge, right? I was in camp. You got to remember the funeral rites. Like that was a miss. Like that was bad news. But I do think, like, when he makes those calls that a commander would make, I thought it was interesting that the movie seemed to want me to not like him for that. Did you feel that same way?
It was an interesting essence of his character, because I think there are things that we are, as the audience, designed to agree with him in some of the decisions that he's making, and get kind of upset at his crew because they're holding a grudge against him. Again, not for any valid reason other than the fact that that's not how their old commander would have done it. And it's like, he would have let us get away with all of this sort of stuff. And so they're going to hold a grudge, even though I think Flanagan knows that Commander Lawrence is right. I just think that he's just mad because we were all fine. We would have been fine. It's that attitude. And so, and that's what I think was interesting and smart about the script, is that they give us those sides of Commander Lawrence that are both where we can see his point of view, but also the stuff where we can see the crew's point of view, like the funeral rites. And so I think that they were smartly walking the line of both sides of that.
I guess so. I never once questioned Widmark, right? I never once questioned his authenticity, his choices. Like I was in camp Widmark the whole time. When I saw him get scraped by the coral, and you get the feeling that the crew starts like really talking about him behind his back, that he's like scared to go on a mission. I was like, it's rare that I am that I'm anti-labor in movies. like I was anti-labor here. You guys need to get in gear. This guy is doing what he thinks is best for his unit. And I found that interesting because I just thought he was trying to do what was right and what he thought was right. And it happens to align with what I thought was right.
Well, except, as you said, the funeral.
Yeah.
Like that was, that's what I'm saying. Like they're giving us both sides. Like, I agree with you. I'm definitely agreeing with him. Like I'm in his camp for the bulk of this, but there are those decisions he makes, like not doing anything about the funeral rites, that really it takes Gary Merrill's character to say, you probably should do something, say something at least. And it's like, yeah.
What would you give to watch a John Lawrence, Pete Vincent, right? Widmark and Merrill, odd couple movie on a submarine. I would watch those guys as roommates all day long.
They
so
were great.
It'd be adorable.
We never got to see them play their cribbage game, but I'm sure it was a thrill.
Right. What other big moments? Any other big moments in here that really you feel like define the story?
I think this film does a good job in setting both of our characters up. Essentially, Lawrence is our protagonist, Flanagan's our antagonist, because the story is more about their relationship than it is about, an antagonist being the Japanese, who they are fighting against in this particular, in these events. The Japanese certainly come into play, and we see them underwater in that last fight, which is fantastic. But really, it's really the conflict between those two characters. And to that end, I think that there were a few elements that I think worked really well to show us who Lawrence is, who Flanagan is, how this pair works together and in opposition. And I think one of the scenes that stands out to me is when the ship gets torpedoed, and the torpedo is a dud, but it's sticking into the medical room where Pappy is, all strapped up because he was shot in the back and is can't move. They can't get him out of there, and so they have to figure out how to get rid of this torpedo and patch the ship up while this room is flooding. And watching Commander Lawrence very selflessly going down there, figuring out how I can disarm this torpedo so that it doesn't accidentally go off and help this soldier who's here. And then Flanagan is the one who's volunteers to come and stand guard. But really it's because Pappy is there. And I loved the whole trying to disarm the torpedo sequence. But then my favorite part of the whole thing is when Lawrence says, "So did they assign you here?" And he's like, "No, I volunteered." And Commander Lawrence thinks that he volunteered to be there to help him out, but he's just like, well, Pappy would have done the same for me. And just watching Widmark's face as he's reading that and acknowledging, oh, of course, yeah, I should have seen that one coming.
Yeah.
But just those little moments of these character interactions, I think work really well in context of giving us a sense of who these characters are, how they interact, and all of that.
I did like that sequence because it ramped up the intensity in a way that as a real peak in the movie because as you said, the underwater stuff is pretty slow paced, even when they're knife fighting at the end. It's fair to maybe double speed it. It's pretty slow. But this sequence is really, really threatening because, as you say, you can't open that door and the water is coming right up to the gurney where our man Pappy is lying and can't be moved. And so every time we have Lawrence jamming that screwdriver into the nose of that torpedo, and let's not forget, he asks there's an exchange between Pete and John, and he says do you have anybody on board who can disarm a torpedo? Because I'll take a crack at it if you don't have anybody better. It's the lowest standard, the I'll take a crack at it, I guess standard, which I thought was really incredible. And then the torpedo keeps nosing around. Every time he jams his screwdriver in the head of it, it keeps shaking. And so the threat, the ticking clock of the room filling with water was damned threatening. It was, I thought that was really great. I wish there were more moments like that in the movie because energetically, it's a real high point.
And then, they finally get the plate off so that they can disarm it. And then he's got to jam that tongue depressor in between the pin and the trigger or whatever the
right.
torpedo parts are called. And
what's inside every torpedo is effectively a mousetrap. I don't know if you knew that. It's just a mousetrap.
Exactly. But it's and I don't know how to have read it other than he gets the tongue depressor in there just as the pin snaps and it stops it from hitting the plate. I couldn't tell if they intended to do that or if that was just pure luck that they happened to get the thing in there just before it went off. I wasn't sure if that was part of the plan to we'll shut this so that it holds it in place. But either way, I'm it was one of those phew sorts of moments. It was great to see the way that whole thing played out. It carried that tension.
I do too. I think it really was great. And I do think it was because it was the proximity to my eye, it was the proximity of the thing that triggered the spring to trap down. It would not have been down there had it not been artificially jostled. And then that's what they were most scared of, was artificially jostling it and triggering it. And so they just happened to be in the right place. Yeah.
It was also, just in the scope of character building, I think it was a very valuable scene to have because, again, the lieutenant commander, in military ranks, you have this sense of the people in the higher up positions generally try to not get to know their subordinates on a personal scale. They try to keep that wall between them. And this was a moment where I can only imagine for Flanagan to actually have his lieutenant commander say, I got to say, I'm a little afraid right now. And, just like acknowledging, like, this scares the hell out of me. I'm pretty nervous that I have to go through this process. And then, of course, he acknowledges moments later, when his hand is shaking, he's like, yeah, I'm a little scared too. It's like that sort of character moment that you have with these characters, I think really allowed for this sense of acknowledgement that, we're both human and we're living through the situation the best we can. And it's not a turning point for their friendship or for their relationship to kind of become a friendship and a sign of respect, but it is a catalyst to start moving us in that direction over the rest of the film. So it's just an incredibly strong centerpiece to the film to watch things as they slowly start shifting.
Maybe I've told you about my buddy he's a ranger, and he teaches halo jumping for the Army, high altitude, low open jumping, and he's been dropped into places all over the world, in Africa and Middle East, and he's now a teacher in Colorado Springs. And I've talked to him about fear before in these kinds of situations, and his story to me I thought was really interesting, that the things like we see here, and I haven't asked him specifically about disarming a torpedo, but he said the things that we see in action are not scary. By the time you're trained for them, those things aren't scary because largely, if something goes wrong, you're not going to know it. You're going to just be dead. And once you accept that, then everything else becomes kind of second nature. The things that are scary is when he speaks of a briefing that has stuck with him for years. He was being dropped into someplace in Africa, and the briefing included, if you get bit by one of these 5 types of snakes, we have no antidote for them, so don't get bit by those things. He said those are the scary things because those are the things that are the anticipatory things. They give you enough time to think about them going wrong, and you're not trained to deal with snakes. It's not a thing that this man's army spends a lot of time thinking about. And so I thought that was really interesting, and it made me think, like, it's nice to see this sort of vulnerability in this scene, but it made me think about it as a concept, like, this is not a thing these guys specifically, or better yet, ask the question, would this have been a thing these guys specifically had been trained to do? They were underwater demolitions teams. Like, is there any realm that we would think that they should be more comfortable dealing with this particular explosive because that's in their realm, or was it just because they're used to doing C4 and blowing stuff up old school?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. And I suppose in the scope of a demolition team, they probably have more experience dealing with bombs and explosives than a lot of the other crew do. But at the same time, I think there's a big difference between a torpedo and the sorts of demolition explosives that they typically are using. Like, that it's a very different type. But at least they have an understanding of what it takes. Like, he was able to open up a torpedo and knew what he needed to do in there, even if it wasn't his realm. Whereas, if some other Navyman had to open up a torpedo, he'd probably like, your guess is as good as mine. Is there a red wire to cut somewhere? Because that would be my first question.
Right. Would you have known to ask for a screwdriver and a tongue depressor? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's on the list. So anyway, just all things to just sort of think about. But I think overall, this movie's sort of historical representation of war, that's a first for this movie. This is the first movie that really, showcased this particular type of unit in the war. And they make a big deal on the boat in the beginning, right? There's that huge brawl that sort of escalates everything. But when the guys stand up and are like, there are X many million men on the, in the army, and there are 1,000 of us. Right. And that sort of ego to set the stage for the difference between these two teams, I think was really great. Like that was a great way to table set for the rest of this movie. I think that the significance of their participation is not to be understated. And also the whole mentality that all soldiers are equal from our commanding officer was noted. Like, I thought that was a great bit of craftsmanship.
Yeah, very much so. Just watching the way that it would work. And just, it was interesting for me to look at how the Navy was working anyway. Like, the fact that they are a unit that goes from ship to ship to ship to submarine, whatever it is, wherever the mission is required. Like, they're not always with the people on this particular vessel, that Lieutenant Commander Vincent is running. And so, yeah, you're going to have these sorts of conflicts between these different troops as they hop onto this boat. And then toward the end of the film, we see them hop onto a submarine because they got to go do this other mission. And so it was just interesting to kind of see the way that they would do that. And you can understand why there is kind of these attitudes with these different military groups. Even to this day, all the military groups are always, they have certain things to say with each other as far as like who's the best and everything. And I thought this was actually a funny thing. We had this scene with the sign, how they snuck onto the beach and planted this sign. Apparently, it is quite the tradition. In fact, if you go to the Underwater Demolition Team Wikipedia page, there's a photo in Da Nang, 1965, where they still have the tradition of sneaking onto the beach and putting a sign up, and it says, "Welcome, U.S. Marines, UDT 12." So clearly, it's a thing that they love to do to poke at the Marines, who always say, we're first on the beach and everything.
Which was Flanagan's exact point. And I in that respect, like, that the movie makes us ask these questions about teamwork and leadership in the form of what risks should be undertaken in the face of team unity. Is it worth getting shot? Is it worth losing your life to make this kind of a joke? And the movie says yes. The movie says, yes, this is actually a thing that's worth doing. And I think a little dalliance with rebellion in these sorts of circumstances keeps people feeling alive in a circumstance where, death is around the corner. In the spirit of, what's left anyway, let's go ahead and prank.
At the same time, though, that is an instance where I think it's a situation where you can always see it from both points of view. And both of them feel like I can see the validity to Lieutenant Commander Lawrence's point of view. Also, the fact that you're putting yourself at risk, your partner got shot, that's not being smart. And in the scope of thinking about the best way to be smart on these missions, you're not showing us that you can become a leader. And so I think that it's an interesting element where we're playing with both sides, but it's definitely a gray area.
I think that's the trick because, if I were half my age, I definitely would have been on Team Flanagan for this whole movie. But I feel like I'm not half my age. I'm definitely Team Lawrence because I'm exactly twice that age, and I feel like just you need to. I feel like Flanagan made the better points, right? He made the better points about keeping men alive.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
Two other things that I wanted to bring up, or three other things. One, just going back to a point I was talking about earlier, the Frogmen, they were created in World War II. Around 1941 is when they really started. The Navy actually started expanding this, the Frogmen program, the UDTs, in the mid-50s, so shortly after this. And this movie certainly contributed to the popularity and people wanting to be part of this. They started shifting it until it became the SEALs in 62. So the Navy SEALs, they kind of continued developing the program, and it officially, like SEAL Team 1 was officially established in January 1962.
Did you look up on the NavySeals.com website all the different numbers? Because I thought this was really interesting. Do you know how they're structured?
As far as like just the team number, or is there a different number you're talking about?
Yeah, because, then there's the whole thing with SEAL Team 6, right? SEAL Team 6 was the big Middle East team. But I didn't know that the numbers coordinated with their environments and theater. So like SEAL Team 1 ended up Western Pacific, and their environment was jungle, desert, and urban. SEAL Team 3 was Middle East, desert, and urban. SEAL Team 5, their geographic responsibility was Korea, Arctic, desert, and urban environments. So they were all sort of trained around these specific environments where they would be deployed. And I think that's really interesting. There are now 22 SEAL teams. What an incredible sort of frame of expertise. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, and the UDT teams, on top of that, like they went up to at least into their 20s. In 1969, there was UDT 22. They were serving in Vietnam. But this film specifically is looking at UDT 4, which received 3 commendations for Guam, Leyte, and Okinawa. So very much kind of like the Japanese, the Pacific arena for this one.
What do you think of this? 22, their geographic responsibility is worldwide, and their environment is riverine.
Wow.
I've never heard that word before.
It sounds like a type of
related
gum.
Related to... We need to get sponsorship for the never created gum. Relating to or situated on a river or riverbank. Riparian, a riverine village.
Yeah, interesting.
They just do rivers.
I guess that makes sense for Vietnam, right?
Yeah, right, totally. But worldwide rivers, they could show up on the Willamette right here. We might see, maybe they're here right now. We wouldn't know because they're Navy SEALs.
You wouldn't know, exactly. Exactly.
Anyway.
Going back to the fantastic partnership that the filmmakers had with the Navy to put this film together, one of my favorite features in the film to go, so that's how they do that, is the fantastic rope line that they have from boat to boat to get one person from one ship over to the other on a little swinging chair that they have with a pulley system. That was so fantastic, watching Richard Widmark go from one boat over to the other to talk to the other captain.
That was awesome. That was one of my favorite bits, and not worth it. There's a lot of guys' hands that your life happens to be in at that point. I thought that was wonderful.
It was so fun. Another note, the music. I loved how toward the end of the film in particular, as they were jumping into their missions, how the composer, who was Cyril Mockridge, started integrating Anchors Away into the score. And I was like, that was a great way to kind of tie us into the military, but using it in a way where it was fairly dramatic, and it worked quite well. Yeah,
I thought so too. I thought it was lovely. I mean, the movie overall is, it was a fun movie. I don't know how many times I'm going to go back to it. Maybe if it ever gets a restoration, I'd like to see it again just to see if I can understand the visuals. But that brings us to why we're talking about it today. In terms of its technical prowess, did you see anything in terms of its black and white cinematography that screams this movie needs to be above others?
Well, and I think this goes to technical achievements more than actual creative compositions. Last week we talked about Death of a Salesman, which is really using a lot of noir, contrasty, shadowy, shots with interesting angles, changing lenses and stuff, some really interesting kind of subjective camera use that we have in that film. This film, I think, likely ended up getting its nomination because of the amount of work that they went through in order to capture the underwater photography that they did throughout this film. That was a huge achievement this was the first Hollywood film where they're really doing that. And so the stuff on the ship is pretty standard. There wasn't anything that stood out to me as spectacular, deserving of a cinematography award. I think the only reason that it ended up in that award category is because of the extensive underwater photography, which was, quite a breakthrough at the time. And we can't ignore that. From today's eyes, it doesn't seem that exciting, especially when you have people like James Cameron doing insane underwater work these days. But at the time, in early 1950s, when you saw something like this, it's this was kind of the first time you were able to really watch something like that, like a Hollywood movie with actors underwater in a situation. And I think that was pretty exciting. And to come up with the tools that they needed in order to make that happen, I would imagine that is why it's in this category.
Yeah. Any other hot items?
Robert Wagner apparently is in here somewhere.
Did you find him?
I did not. Apparently, it is just he's in a background somewhere. They were starting to develop him as an actor. He has a line. He says like "yes, sir" or something like that. That was about it, and I totally missed it. But it's funny. Like Jack Warden has a small part right at the very beginning of the film, which was I easily recognized him. But yeah, I never saw Robert Wagner. It's just fun to see like these people getting starts in films like this.
Yeah. What do you think of old Lloyd Bacon, our fair director?
I think that there's a sense of him as a filmmaker who, I don't know, I think of more I guess I picture him as just a very much Hollywood sort of filmmaker who was making things like 42nd Street and Footlight Parade. Like those are the sorts of films that I picture with Lloyd Bacon. And and so I guess I don't know, I don't think I know a whole lot of his work, but it is kind of fun to see him, just seeing what he can do. I feel like he's probably a director who is a fairly safe Hollywood filmmaker.
Yeah, I mean, 130 credits. Like the guy was churning them out, and I have put on Letterboxd. Right, I'm looking at his credits and saying fade the watched films, and my goodness, there are not very many of them. I don't think I have a good sense of what continuity for Lloyd Bacon would look like for me at this point. He's sort of new to me, but I have seen 42nd Street. You know, there are a couple in here, but I wouldn't have been able to tell you Lloyd Bacon directed them.
I think Newt Rockne, All-American, is probably one of his more recognized films, but I wonder if that's because of him or more Ronald Reagan, you know? Like, I think of that film, I think of Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. And I don't think from this movie I'm real intrigued to just jump on a Lloyd Bacon series. I don't think I'm there yet.
I don't think so, but it was a very easy film to watch. Like I didn't feel like it dragged. It just kind of moved quickly. It was, a breezy 96 minutes. And I thought it was, well crafted.
Yeah.
And especially dealing with the Navy side of things, dealing with the underwater side of things. I think there was a lot of that complexity that was pulled off very well.
Me too.
All right. Well, we will be right back, but first, our credits.
The Next Reel is a production of True Story FM. Engineering by Andy Nelson. Music by Ian Post, Oriel Novella, and Eli Catlin. Andy usually finds all the stats for the awards and numbers at the-numbers.com, boxofficemojo.com, imdb.com, and wikipedia.org. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. Sequels? Andy, is there a Frogmen too? The Frogsmen?
There almost was, believe it or not.
No.
The producer wrote a story called Frogmen in Korea that was intended to follow this up, but it ended up falling apart. There was a TV remake of this called Deep Water in 1957. James Whitmore was in that as Flanagan with Ralph Meeker and Richard Arlen. But that was kind of it. In the scope of other stories featuring the UDT, there was another film called Underwater Warrior in 1958, directed by Andrew Martin. That one took place between World War II and the Korean War. I don't know if I've seen other specific UDT-focused things, but obviously SEALs have certainly, the Navy SEALs have been in films.
Yes, for sure. For sure. And in terms of awards, this was a real sweeper, category sweeper, right? I mean, so many nominations.
This film, to be fair, I don't think that this film is the sort to be an award film. It's probably designed to be an audience pleaser more than anything. The fact that it ended up getting 2 nominations, I think probably was a thrill for the filmmakers. Again, the reason we're here, it did get nominated at the Oscars for black and white cinematography, but it lost to A Place in the Sun, which we'll be talking about next week. It also, interestingly, was nominated for Best Writing Motion Picture Story, that always, confusing category that started from the beginning of the Oscars all the way up until just a few years after this. 1956 is when they dropped this award. That was essentially for treatments. Like, this person wrote a great treatment and then somebody else came in and wrote a great script from it. It was nominated for Best Writing Motion Picture Story. Oscar Millard is the one who wrote that, but that went to 7 Days to Noon. I haven't seen that one. Have you seen that?
I have not seen that. Nope. That's new to me.
When a scientist threatens to detonate a powerful bomb in the heart of London, Scotland Yard has just 7 days to find him before it is too late. Huh.
Is it 7.5 days? I mean, it is noon. Anyway, how'd it do at the box office, Andy? I know you released the carrier pigeons and you were able to find the scraps of spreadsheets, hand-penciled, to give you a sense of just how much money this movie made.
Bacon's notes.
Bacon's notes.
No, alas, if I thought Death of a Salesman was hard, I should not have expected anything more for this much more obscure title. I have no idea what the budget was for this one. It premiered May 24th, 1951 in Little Creek, Virginia, and then it opened June 29th, 1951. This went on to earn $2.1 million domestically, or $24.5 million in today's dollars. That is more than Death of a Salesman did, so maybe this wasn't a box office flop. In fact, from everything I've read, this was very popular at the box office. Again, probably because it's kind of an adventure movie. Still, it didn't end up in the top 10 of the year, I know that much, so I'll just go with that. Somewhere in between.
Well, I think that's probably exactly right. This has a high burn, but very short. I imagine it being very interesting for my dad when he was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this would have been the movie to go to the theater for, and maybe multiple times, and then not think about all that often.
Well, and it's interesting because this is the sort of film, as we talked about in our pre-show chat, kind of those films that the military participated in or cooperated with Hollywood to make the films. This was a popular film. Like they said, there was a rise in people wanting to join because of this film. So I think it's very much that sort of action film that, people probably get excited about. Like, yeah, I can't wait to go do that.
Yeah. Well, I liked it well enough.
Yeah.
It's not a 5-star, but I liked it well enough. I'm glad we talked about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting look into film history just because of the underwater photography at the time. But just, it's fun to see. I mean, I'll always watch Richard Widmark on screen. He's such an easy watch. I love him as an actor. And so it's fun to check this one off his list.
I think so, too.
All right. Well, we'll be right back for our ratings. But first, here's the trailer for next week's movie, George Stevens' A Place in the Sun.
This is the unforgettable story of a boy from nowhere, fighting desperately for his place in the sun, torn between the conflicting passions that shaped his destiny. Montgomery Clift, dazzled by the radiant beauty of Elizabeth Taylor, a girl so far above him she seemed like a goddess, but only too human when he held her in his arms.
We'll think of something somehow, whatever way we can. We'll have such wonderful times together, just the two of us.
Montgomery Clift, bound by the warm and vital appeal of Shelley Winters, the girl who clung to him with an overwhelming hunger for love.
I've been wanting to do that for such a long time.
So did I.
Will we see each other again like this?
It's up to you. You gotta be careful.
One love grew in the shadows of the night, sealed by a secret they could share with no one. The other love flamed in the bright light of gaiety and laughter, a need that drove him with all the recklessness of youth itself, a dream that was built on deception.
You lied to me, George, for the last time. Now I want you to come and get me.
Yes, I'll come down in the morning.
And if you're not here in half an hour, I'll come where you are. I'll tell them everything, George. I mean it.
You too will know the fears, the desperation that claimed him, as fate weaves the strange fabric of his life. For A Place in the Sun is a story that will forever hold a place among your greatest dramatic memories.
Is your name George Eastman?
Yes.
You're under arrest.
It is hard to believe we've been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
You're telling me producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a lot of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
The Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals links to the source material for all of our adapted film discussions. Purchasing through our links supports the show.
In Season 13, we explore various awards categories and the films nominated in them.
We wrapped up our 1940 Best Picture series with adaptations of Mice and Men from John Steinbeck and Wuthering Heights from Emily Bronte's novel, not to mention the play Dark Victory by George Brewer Jr. and Bertram Bloch.
The 1947 Academy Award adapted screenplay series featured Anna and the King of Siam, based on Margaret Langdon's book, plus The Best Years of Our Lives, Brief Encounter, and The Killers.
The 1952 cinematography nominees included Death of a Salesman and A Streetcar Named Desire, A Place in the Sun, based on both a play and a book, and Strangers on a Train, based on Patricia Highsmith's first novel.
So many great movies based on books and plays, like Beckett, The Pumpkin Eater,
A Boy and His Dog, Rollerball,
The Princess Bride, Congo, The Scarlet Letter,
Jackie Brown, The Deep End, The Gray, The Woman in Black,
and Top Gun Maverick, which I'm very much looking forward to revisiting.
Get the source books at thenextreel.com/originals.
Start your next read or reread from the movies we've covered. Visit thenextreel.com/originals today. Letterboxd Andy, you know, it's the time where we rob stars from future Pete and Andy and give them to today's films. How'd you end up rating this movie on our favorite Letterboxd?
This was a fun film, as we said. It's not anything new or exciting. The underwater stuff was great. It was an easy watch. I still liked it. I'm going to say 3 stars and a heart.
I am too, right across the bow, so to speak. It was an easy watch. Again, I'm not going to race back to see it unless it gets a nice restoration, and I don't see that coming.
Hey, you never know.
Truth.
All right. Well, don't forget to visit thenextreel.com/letterboxd to get your patron or pro membership. It works for renewals as well. So, what did you think about The Frogmen? We would love to hear your thoughts. Hop into the Show Talk channel over in our Discord community, where we will be talking about the movie this week.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Letterboxd giveth, Andrew.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
Everybody agrees with us. It's a 3-star movie. The average speaks volumes. I have 2, but they're very short. And
okay, I have 1, and it's very short as well.
Okay, let's sandwich them. I'll do it first, then you go, and then I'll cap it. Okay. Number 1, this is 2.5 from Michael. I like the part with the coral poisoning, which is true. Ow, coral. And then a series of episodic events happening to a team of World War II frogmen that never actually managed to convince me it was taking place during a war, which I think is an astute observation from Michael. It goes on, but he has more stuff, but we pretty much talked about that, so I won't belabor that. That's my first one. What's yours?
I have just a 3-star by Travis Thomas, who says, boys splashing around for the war.
I should let you go last. But my second one has actually recommendations, and they're movies that I immediately want to put on my watch list. Pretty solid, says Chris. But if you want military leader Widmark, Take the High Ground is better. And if you want submarine Widmark, Hell and High Water is way better. 2 movies to jump on that list.
Take the High Ground, Richard Brooks, and Hell and High Water is one that I actually have the soundtrack for that. I have,
but you've never seen the movie.
Seen it. I have not seen it. Samuel Fuller. I mean, yeah, it's hard to argue Samuel Fuller, Richard Brooks as 2 filmmakers telling big war stories. Both films I've heard good things about, but I'll have to add those to my watch list as well.
I think it would be fun to do a list of to do a series of movies that are like explained like this: submarine Widmark, military leader Widmark. Like, if you want attorney Tom Cruise, or if you want pilot Tom Cruise, or if you want astronaut Tom Cruise, right? That's a good way to build, I think, a list. I think I'd be excited about that.
Yeah, or Psycho Widmark with
Widmark,
Night in the City.
Right, yeah. Right. There you go.
Or no, Kiss of Death is the one where he pushes the lady in the wheelchair. He's fantastic.
The best.
Was he also in The Swarm? There's another, like, he's the general in that too. So
right, another military leader Widmark, but
so many.
I don't know how I would differentiate that. What would the word be against the Swarm?
Bee-stung Widmark.
Bee-stung Widmark. Okay, all right. Well,
yeah. Cowboy Widmark. We got to throw Warlock on there
for sure.
God, that's a good one.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Letterboxd.